So if you are in the sanctuary or sanctuary area, this is AI and the church. So if that's where you expect to be, you are in the right place. If it's not, then you're in the wrong place. So to get started, I do have some handouts. Can I get somebody to help me on that? Lynn, thank you. All right. So yes, this is AI in the Church. My name is Jeremy Scott. I am blessed to serve the people of Johnstown, Colorado. Before I was there, I was equally blessed to serve the conference as the congregational developer. And before I was a pastor, I was actually a software engineer and did that for 15 years. That's what my undergraduate is in. And so anytime we are dealing with the intersection of the church and modern technology, I am in my happy place. And this is definitely one of those places. So just to kind of set the stage, what I'm handing out to you is really the meat of the content, and it's really designed to be self-paced. It's something you can do, at home, at another time. And if you look at the bottom of the cover page, my website's on there. You can download a digital copy of it from there, which might be helpful in some of the copying and pasting that might be done. I'm going to come down here. This feels weird to be all the way up there. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today, first off, I want to get a sense of the room. I've done these trainings a couple of times, and sometimes I have groups that are actually already, using AI in maybe some kind of limited way, and so they're looking to just sort of expand their skills. And I've had groups where most people had literally never even touched it. So how many of you have some experience already with generative AI through either Google Gemini or ChatGPT or anything like that? Uses a little bit. Okay. How many of you would say you use it daily? Are you daily users? Yeah. You hourly. That would be me. Okay. So let's just do a little table setting here as far as that goes. We're going to do a fairly general introduction to AI and and how we can use it successfully in the life of the church. So first thing it's really important to understand is what are we talking about when we're talking about these modern AI systems? So we're going to talk today about what is known as generative or conversational AI. So this is your ChatGPTs, your Claudes, your Microsoft Copilots, or your Google Gemini. I am a big fan of Google Gemini. That's where I spend most of my time. People have their preferences. That doesn't really matter because they all basically work in the same way, in that you are having a, conversation with a computer about whatever it is that you want to talk about. Now, AI, as far as that term goes, artificial intelligence, is a little misleading. And calling these large language models, which is what they're called, artificial intelligence is descriptive, and there's also some marketing in there, right? The computer that you're interacting with, when you're interacting with one of these large language models, it approximates, and it looks like it is intelligent. It looks like it is thinking, but it is not actually thinking in the way that you and I think, right? It's not really that. And in fact, many people would argue that the proper term for this is actually augmented intelligence, right? When you are in a conversation with the AI, you are the intelligent thing, right? You are the one bringing all of the intelligence to that conversation. What's happening behind the scenes with these large language models is what it's actually doing is a whole lot of statistics. That's how these things got built. Basically, some smart people figured out that if they took the entirety of written human knowledge, which at this point has all been digitized, pretty much every book that exists in the world, there is a digital equivalent of it. It has been run through software, and all of those words and all those thoughts and ideas existed. So what smart people figured out is we could take that, all of human knowledge, and we could run it through a set of algorithms. And if you were to print off the set of algorithms that actually power large language models, it would be about 2 pages, 2 pieces of paper, right? These are not actually overly sophisticated algorithms. The actual program, the coding, isn't actually all that sophisticated. What's sophisticated about it is that how much information they fed through that, and thus what those statistical models are able to do. AI with your conversational AI, what it is that it's doing. It is trying to figure out what it is that it thinks you want, which leads us to some of the, right at the beginning, some caveats about using AI, so AI, as it exists today, has an incredible amount of knowledge, right? It has read everything. Every word that John Wesley wrote, it has read and it has run through its system and it has at its disposal, right? It has a vast amount of knowledge. It has almost no wisdom, right? That is the part that you have to bring to the conversation. You bring the wisdom in how you ask your questions. You bring the wisdom in how you interpret its responses. It doesn't know. It doesn't have that piece. It is also, by its design, trying to figure out what you want. It wants to give you whatever it is that you want, which means it's also a really eager little puppy. And it will try its darndest to answer whatever question you have in the best way that it can. And if answering your question means making something up, it will make something up sometimes. That was a huge problem in the early days when you were talking about like ChatGPT 1.0 and earlier and everything. That is a piece they've actually worked on rather significantly, which is good. They've definitely developed the models in such a way that they're actually giving you not only answers that sound good, but answers that are actually true, right? But underneath, what it's trying to do is whatever it is that you want it to do, right? So it's trying to give you what you want. But then the danger in that is it's trying to give you what you want, right? And so that sometimes, again, that includes, and they call it in the language around this, it has a hallucination, right? It just decides that something's true because it works for whatever it is that you're asking it to do. So those are kind of the challenges about it. Now, AI at the end of the day is a tool. And it is a tool for us to use that offers us an incredible level of efficiency. Like, that's what it is set up to do. It is set up to take complicated tasks, things that may take us a whole lot of time, and do it in a far more efficient way, in a far more conversational way. And if you think about it, this is what we have used computers and technology to do pretty much from the beginning, right? Email is a far more efficient way to send written communication than writing it out on a piece of paper and putting a stamp on it and, putting it in the mail. Now, we still do mail things, right? I mean, we still do those things, and that's good. There are times when that's appropriate, but there are times when we need to get something done efficiently, and we need to get it done quickly, and so then we turn to our modern tools like email and text messaging and all that kind of stuff. What AI allows us to do is it lets us bring that level of efficiency into domains that previously we didn't have tools to do. And that includes things like research, that includes things like writing and written communication, that includes like all the things that Gen AI is good at. Now, as people of faith, obviously, one of the things that we recognize, we see throughout the Bible and throughout Scripture, is God constantly and continually encourages God's people to use the tools at their disposal. It goes all the way back to the book of Exodus when he's giving instructions on how to build a tabernacle and how to do all of the things that he wants them to do. You know, God gave us brains, he gave us hands. We were given the ability to create and develop these tools and these resources, and God uses them and encourages us to use them. So I never feel like we should have any kind of like weirdness or anything about, you know, using the tools that we are given in the way that makes sense. So that's my little disclaimer there at the beginning. And then I'm going to walk all the way up here. All right. So, and I think especially though, also we have to recognize that as Methodists, we have an interesting history around this as well. And our history is that John Wesley loved and used every innovative tool for communication that was at his disposal. It is arguable that, especially as people who stand in the Protestant tradition, if we had not invented the printing press, we would not be here, right? Martin Luther used it. Wesley used it to great effect. He was fascinated by the modern innovations of his day. He was crazy interested in electricity. If you read, especially if you read Primitive Physics, his book on health, it has some really interesting things to say in it. Most of the recipes or the prescriptions that he gives in that book, you should not do because they will do more harm to you. But at his time, he didn't know that. But he did write that book, and he wrote that book because he saw there were innovative things happening that were making people's lives better, making people's lives more healthy, and he wanted those shared, and he wanted people to have as much access to it as possible. Every method of communication that was available to him, Wesley used. So as Methodists, we stand in this tradition of being, quite frankly, early adopters. One of the reasons Methodism thrived in the way that it did is it started, as most of us know, in the upper room. It started as a college ministry. It started amongst a group of people who were both, one, very interested in their faith and learning how to express and do their faith and the methods around it, and two, as young people of the college age of their time, young college-age people aren't a lot different today than they were before, and so they had that youthful excitement and energy about how do we use these new inventions like the printing press and all these other ways that we have to communicate now to do this work in a more efficient way. So I think actually not only as Christians, but us as Methodists not only have permission to figure out how do we use these tools well, but we are actually following in the footsteps of those who went before when we choose to embrace them. Now, when I was asked to do this, I told, I think it was Jessica who asked me, and I'm like, that's fine. My talk is going to be really, really practical. If you want to, do some hand-wringing around, the consequences of the data centers and the water usage and all that kind of stuff, that's a different conversation, right? And I'm not saying it's not a conversation worth having. It's definitely a conversation we need to have. Anytime there's a new technological shift like the one we're living through now, it brings along the ethical and moral conversations. That's important, but that's not what we're doing here. My concern is, and my interest in it is, how do I use all of the tools at my disposal so that I can do the work that I feel called by God to do in a way that not brings life to me, brings life to my church, and also is allows for me as much efficiency as possible, right? Because we all know in the life of the church and the life of ministry, there's the things we love to do, the things we like to do, the things that bring us life and joy, and then there's the things we have to do. And if we're honest, we're always looking for ways of taking the have-tos and making those take up less of our time so that we can spend more time doing the things that really do the ministry and really do feed our souls and feed the souls of our people. So when we're going through this time, and when you're going through your packet, my invitation to you is to think about, are there opportunities to use these new tools to make some of the things that I know I need to do or I ought to be doing more efficient and more easy in my life so that I can have more time to do the things that, I know that I like to do or I feel particularly called to do. And I think as we go through this, you will see there are a lot of places where that is possible. All right. Questions about the introduction? Okay. All right, I'm gonna go back up here. All right, so here are the basic guardrails that you need to think about when using your AI tools. First of all, don't trust the facts. And again, this is getting better. It's getting better all the time. Early AI did have a lot of problems where, again, in order to make you happy, it would just make things up. They're doing the modern systems, if you start talking about, especially when you get into like Gemini version 3 and the latest versions of OpenAI's ChatGPT, they understand that these are problems, and they really have addressed it. That is to say, though, when AI tells you something that is not just a matter of opinion, right? If it tells you something and is giving you a fact, if it is important to you that whatever fact it gives you is true, you should double check it, right? And oftentimes that's just a Google search, right? But now, of course, if you do a Google search, the first thing Google's gonna pop up is its own little AI thing at the top, so you gotta scroll below that, But you do need to do that. And that's about just making sure that you maintain your position as the human being and the expert in the room, right? When you are in conversation with your AI tools, you are the expert, right? It is there to help you. I like to think about it, again, it's a tool to augment your work. I like the idea of thinking about it as like the co-pilot in the situation. But your job is to make sure. So first step is don't necessarily blindly trust what it tells you if what it's telling you is a statement of fact. That you should always double check. All right, the next thing is don't share secrets. Again, this has gotten a little bit better, but when you interact with AI, you as a human being, one of the things you're doing is you're helping that AI learn better about human beings. And one of the things that you are doing when you sign up for these tools is you are giving those software companies, whoever's providing that AI tool to you, permission to capture your side of the conversation and use your side of the conversation to train the future versions of the AI tool. Because AI needs to interact with real human thought, real human writing in order to continue to learn and develop. So that is part of what you are allowing them to do when you do that, is to capture your side of the conversation, which generally speaking is fine. However, you don't want to feed your bank statements into AI. Or if you have confidential information, this is really important in things like the medical community, legal practices and things like that. But as pastors, we do deal with some sensitive information. So one of the general rules that I have is AI doesn't need to know, nor does it benefit by knowing people's proper names, right? So if you do want to have a conversation with it about an issue in the life of your church, if you do have a pastoral care conundrum that you want to get its input on, it's actually fairly good at that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You can use it in that way, but just don't include the names, right? Don't include any identifying information because that is going to get captured and stored in the background somewhere. Now, the chance of this coming out in any way is fairly limited, but as a general rule, you need to know that's what's going on. So try to keep things, especially one of the best things to do is if you're dealing with a situation and you're getting its help for something that's a real situation involving real people, don't include any identifying or confidential information in there. And if you don't, and it doesn't care, and if you don't, then you're usually okay. And then don't ignore the spirit. So we are blessed to, be in a business where, we understand, right, that we never do our work alone, and we understand that God's Spirit is with us and dwells with us. And this is, again, AI is a tool to augment that, but we should always, try to stay in connection with the Spirit and what it's moving and what it's doing, and recognize that sometimes Spirit works through your computer. So, yeah. Yes.
Sometimes it's not. What if you're writing an email or something that is strictly confidential? Is AI listening in, or how do we keep it out of AI's brain?
The AI tools that are baked into things like Word and your email program and stuff like that don't necessarily work in the same way, and they're not capturing that information as much. But if you're in a ChatGPT conversation with it, part of that is you are allowing it to do that, and they are also allowing you to turn that off. And I think Gemini now does, where you can choose to say, actually, I don't want to share my information. Don't capture my side of the conversation for training. So it's just a matter of the tool that you're using.
So you have to ask AI if you want to try something, and then it's going to start paying attention, or?
Yes. Yeah, they're not looking at, unless you actively engage with it, they're not looking over your shoulder. Yeah, the autocomplete works a little bit differently. It's a much more simplified version, and they're not training in that way. This is more specifically when you've got an actual chat window open. So, yeah. So the main interface today for how most of us will interact with these tools is it's a chat interface, right? And so if you haven't done it, you can go to ChatGPT and create an account for free and start interacting with it. Or you can go to Google's Gemini. If you have a Google account, a Gmail account for any reason, you already have an account with Gemini, you can start there. And when you get there, you're literally going to get a conversation. You're going to get a chat window, and it's going to basically say, what do you want to talk about? And most of us, for our first interactions with AI, if you're like me, the first thing you said, you got the little chat window and you said, tell me a joke. And it will tell you a joke, and it's kind of funny. And it feels kind of magical the first time you do it, and which is fine. But again, you are in charge of the conversation. So you just get to tell it, this is what I'm working on, this is what I need help with. Here's the thing. You are still interacting, as magical as that feels, and you can get enticed over time when you get into these conversations with it to think about it as more human than it actually is. It is a little bit of a danger there, but you're still talking to a machine. And there is always going to be better and worse ways of interacting with computers. There is the way it's very adaptable, and it will try to do, like I said, it will always try to do its best for what it is that you think it wants you to do. The more that you are explicitly tell it what it is that you want it to do, the better the result you are going to get. And there's a couple of different frameworks for this. And so that's really what we're going to talk about for most of our time together here, and then you can build on it with the guide at home. But there is a way of interacting with the AI that really helps it understand better what it is that you want it to do. And so the way that I like to talk about it and talk about it is there are three parts to starting a conversation with AI. There's your persona, and that is where you are telling AI who you are, right? It doesn't know when you open up a clean chat window if it's talking to me, if it's talking to my wife, if it's talking to somebody, in Chicago or any other person. It doesn't know who you are from the beginning. So the first thing that is really helpful is if you tell it who you are, right? Or more specifically, what part of you are in this conversation. So we call that a persona statement. So I have a paragraph persona statement that introduces me to AI that says, I am the pastor of the United Methodist Church in Johnstown, Colorado. My church is a rather purple church in that we have, and we are in a suburban setting. So when I am interacting with Gemini and asking it to help me with anything related to my work of my church, the first thing I do is copy and paste that persona statement in there so it knows who I am, who my church is, and what the context is that I am asking things from. So that gives it a really good beginning of who it is. So then it knows how to make me happy, right? It knows, with my persona statement, it knows that the things that we should probably are interested in, and the things we should probably avoid, right? And because it knows I'm United Methodist, when it reaches for resources, it's going to lean on John Wesley and Charles Wesley and those sorts of people versus, say, like John Calvin or whatever. So remember, this thing has all of human knowledge at its disposal, right? That's a wide pool to draw from. So the first thing you do is the persona statement. And I actually have several of them depending on which hat I'm wearing at that time. And the nice thing is, these are copy and pastable, right? You just, once you've got a paragraph that seems to work and triggers the AI to do what you want it to do, you copy, you paste that thing into a note, and when you come to a new session, you copy and you paste it back in. It remembers some things. So within a given chat, right, it knows. You don't ever have to put it back again. That's the other thing, too, about these tools is these are not, it understands the conversation. So they will over time, and the different vendors are different on how they handle this. Gemini and ChatGPT will start to develop a little bit of a profile on you in the background based on how it is that you interact with it. But it's not as specific as the persona statement is. And if you're like me and you come to it wearing different hats at different times, it is really helpful. Because when I'm interacting it as the pastor trying to plan stuff for my worship, that's one thing. When I'm interacting with it as the executive director of the Boulder Spirit Foundation, that's another thing. And when I'm interacting with it as the D-list YouTube star that I am, not really, but that's another thing. So it allows you, having those statements allows you to switch between those roles, and you're not requiring it to intuit what it is you're asking it about. Yeah. Yeah, you can, yeah. Yes. So you didn't hear that. You can ask it. I mean, you can ask it what it knows, and it will tell you. And if you can tell it to forget. And I think Gemini and ChatGPT 2 have a place where you can actually put in your descriptive statement, and then it will just automatically add it every time if you wanted to. I don't do that because, again, I switch between all these different hats, but it's just a nice way of telling it who it is that it's interacting with and what role what your persona is in that moment. So that's the first thing. Who are you? Who are you in this conversation? Who do you want it to be interacting with? Because it's going to talk to you differently depending on what you do. So that's the persona. Type it in. Most of them have voice to text, but all the large language models are set up, but they're all text-based. That's underneath, that's how these things work, is they're doing pattern recognition on words and language, but they're all trained on text. So even the ones that you can speak to, it is doing voice to text in the background in order to do its work, because all of the statistical modeling is based on the text. Which is why, there's a varying quality in some of the language models depending on which language you speak, right? Because it has ingested, most of what is suggested is in English, right? it has ingested things in all these other languages, and ChatGPT and Gemini will speak other languages for you. But the thing that it knows the most is what it's been exposed to the most, and what it's been exposed to the most is, in the beginning especially, was the English language, and then other European languages. The more it's getting better in some of the other ones, but if there is a language that doesn't have a lot of written content associated with it, there isn't anything to train it on. Yeah. Yes. It's text. Yeah. Yeah. It looks like it's like a text message chain. Yep. That's generally the way it works. So that's a good question. I forgot how. All right. Okay. So that is the persona. So it is important to have this, develop this, so that you can again give it what it is that you want. Now, if you're wondering about this, one of the things you can do is you can ask ChatGPT or Gemini to help you write your persona statement. So you can start the chat by saying, I would like to write a persona statement for myself for future interactions with AI. Please help me. Ask me four or five questions, and I think this is in your handout. Ask me 4 or 5 questions and help me draft this statement, right? You can also say, here is my persona statement. Tell me what is missing, right? What do you not understand about this thing, right? So again, it wants to help you, and it knows itself well. So if you say, here's my, what's missing from this, or what's unclear, it will then tell you what's unclear, and you can then say, oh, well, what I meant was this, right? I'm glad you don't understand this. What I meant is this. Can you please now create for me a new persona statement that includes this information that you will understand best? And it will go, sure, I'm an eager little puppy, and I want to do whatever you say, and then it will do that for you. All right, persona, who you are. The next thing is role. What do you want the AI to do, right? Who is it in this conversation to you? What role do you want it to play? If you don't tell it what role you want it to play, it will try to guess, and it might guess well. But one of the challenges I think we especially face is, again, it has all of human knowledge at its disposal. And it knows a lot about Christianity, right? But it knows a lot about many different expressions of Christianity. But if you don't tell it that you are speaking to it, especially from a Methodist or a Protestant perspective, right, in some way, then you run the risk of it relying on other sources others than we may, default go to. So you need to give it a little narrowing down of the broad array of things it can draw from. You can narrow it down by saying, I need you to do this for me, right? So if I'm working on, a sermon, right? And this is where I tend to use it a lot. Writing as a sermon is like, I need, a biblical scholar. So I'm going to tell it, this is me, this is who I am, this is my persona. I need you to be a biblical scholar, expert in the Old Testament, and who can give me advice on, how to interpret a particular passage, right? And the more you can give it, these should be like strong paragraphs, the more that you give it in terms of its role, the more that it is able to spend less time thinking, trying to figure out what it is exactly you want it to do, because it will already know what you want it to do, but that you will then it will get to spend its time and energy actually giving you what it wants. You gotta kind of narrow it down. Otherwise, you're making it guess. Right? So the more specific you can be, I've had people say in these trainings like, oh, I didn't want to narrow it, I didn't want to say too much because I didn't want to whatever. And I'm like, no, it's going to do its job no matter what. But so give it the persona, who are you? Give it its role, what do you want it to be? And again, you can see where this is something that over time you're just going to copy and paste, right? Because there's probably tasks or things you need it to do that you're going to do quite often. Right? So I literally have a note document on my thing that just has all these things in there, and I can copy and paste. It takes me about 5 seconds to do it, and then I get to have a conversation, with a biblical scholar who can help me think through whatever it is I needed to think through. And there's some examples in your handout to how to do that. And then finally, the last thing is task. What is it that you're doing in the moment, right? So I might say, this is me, I need you to be a biblical scholar, and then the task is, I'm preparing a sermon on Matthew chapter 10. I need some insights on how to think about it exegetically. And then you're into the conversation piece. And now, again, it is a conversation. And this is why it's different than like Google search. One of the challenges people do, one of the easy modes to fall into in the beginning is you treat it a little bit like Google search, right? Like it's Google search on steroids. The difference is when you do one Google search and then you come back and you do another one, what happened before has no bearing on the one you're doing now, right? It's not interactive in that way. This is different. This is a conversation. It knows what it's talked about. It knows the whole history of the conversation you're having. And each subsequent interaction, like a real conversation with a real person, brings with it everything that happened before, and you continue to build on it, right? And so that's where the real power comes in, is once you're into the conversation, you can usually start with things that are a little more general, like, tell me the major, if you're dealing again with that biblical scholar, what is the major themes present, in this passage? Oh, okay. Oh, that one's interesting. Let's talk about that one some more. Tell me more about this. Oh, that's interesting. Let's worry about this now. And so then you're actually into the part where it's really able to provide an incredible amount of value. But the way you can get, the frustrating part tends to be when you can't get it where you need it to go, or it's not giving you kind of what you need. And oftentimes the reason it's not is because you haven't adequately told it what it is that you need. So this framework, the persona, role, and task, are kind of the first three chunks of any conversation. Now, this really also depends on, what it is that you're doing. Right? If you just need some general information that's just some general knowledge stuff, you don't have to go through all of this, right? That's not really for that. But when you're sitting down to do some heavy lifting because you need help writing that stewardship letter that you've been dreading writing, right? Then it needs to know these things, right? And the task is, I need to write my fall stewardship letter, and this is the theme and everything else. Help me think through some thoughts or ideas on how that might go, right? Okay. We're going to pause for questions because I can get really excited about this. Questions? Yeah. I'm sorry. We didn't get that handout. Oh. There are more. You can have one. I'm sorry. All right. Questions? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So what is, it's right there in the name generative, right? Generative AI. What is it good at? It's good at generating things. And there are some, typical probably use cases that come to mind. Obviously, it's really helpful in the sermon and worship planning. I've used it for this all the time. If I have a particular theme, say, that I want to develop a worship series around, I might say, hey, I want to do a worship series around forgiveness, right? Give me some scriptures that might be good to use that deal with the theme of forgiveness, and it will more than happily, give you that list. One of the other things it's good at is different elements in worship. So if I have a plan for, my worship series, I know what I'm doing, right? I can say, hey, help me write a call to worship for this worship series. Here's the description of what the worship series is about. Here's the scriptures we're going to be using. Give me some thoughts or ideas for creating a call to worship around that. It's very good at those sorts of things. I've had it help me write new verses to common hymns. right? I'm like, I want an additional verse to be thou my vision that deals with this topic that we can use. And it's like, sure, here you go. Things like that. It's very, very good at the planning piece and the development piece. Again, writing stewardship letters, helping you draft those things. Those things are really good. One of the things that may not be necessarily as obvious, I was doing one of these trainings once, and somebody said, hey, actually, afterwards they came back and they're like, oh, we are in our church, having to make this really important decision about the life and the future of our church. And I put this whole presentation together about this thing that we're going to do. And what they did is they fed that presentation in and they said, what questions might I get from parishioners about this thing that we are asking about, right? What is unclear in this presentation, or what questions might they have? And he remarked, he's like, I was incredibly impressed with the quality of response, and it actually surfaced some things that I didn't think about, right? I have turned my amazing wife, Emily, into a big AI fan for some of these things, and she said the other day, I'm an outline and extemporaneous preacher. She is more of a manuscript preacher. And so one of the things that she has done is she has taken her manuscripts when she's done with them and fed it back in. And they're like, is there anything in here that is unclear? Are there any thoughts that I left whatever? Where might there be some issues? It is a really, really good editor. Right? It is very, very good at that, both grammatically, right, as far as that goes, but also in kind of the content piece. And it's able to say, well, actually, you started this thought over here that you never finished, right? So there's different ways of using it in that capacity as well, where you are still the human, you are still responsible, you're the one that's going to be standing up there preaching these words. They probably should be yours, right? But as far as that other eye on it, that can see and give you feedback on it, it is really good at that. And what I find is, I find it easier to go there than, I find it easier to receive the feedback from it because I know that it's a soulless machine, versus, even just, giving things to my wife and say, what do you think about this, right? It just hits a little bit differently. So I've had people in trainings too say it's honestly almost a little easier to be a little bit more honest with it. And receive the feedback in a more honest way because I know I'm talking to a machine, right? And it's not as concerned. I'm not as concerned about hurting its feelings. I yell at my AI all the time. You probably shouldn't do that, but sometimes it feels good because it does stupid things. So there's that piece. So the planning piece, the creative piece. How do I need a letter for this? I need this, or whatever it is. It's great at that. The other thing that it's really good for is things after the fact, right? It's wonderful at remixing content, right? And so if you are, especially if you're a manuscript preacher, say, you put a ton of time and energy into that. You put your life into that. You brought forth some words that you hope are going to inspire people. And every Sunday we do this, and every Sunday we do it, and we get to the end of worship, and we're like, oh, great, that's done. I don't have to think about that sermon anymore. And then we're on to the next thing. Except our people have just heard it for the first time. And if we've done our job, then hopefully they're continuing to think about it, or they're continuing, to ruminate on it in the days to come, right? I always love it on Monday morning. People ask me questions about my sermon. I'm like, I don't know. I'm on to the next thing now. So what it allows you to do, and what you can do with it, and we do this a lot at our church, is you can feed in, again, either the manuscript or whatever you have, and say, help me write 5 daily prayer prompts that I can post on Facebook based on this sermon. Right? I used to train this when I used to do social media training, and everyone would, inevitably people would come back to me afterwards and say, that all sounds great, and I recognize why that's value and that's important, but I don't have time or energy to do that, and I don't know who else could, right? Efficiency. It literally takes 5 minutes to go back and say, here's what I did, here's what happened, give me 5 daily prayer prompts that I can go real quick and schedule as scheduled Facebook posts, right? Instead of it taking an hour or 2 hours, which means we just don't do it, it's now down to something like that. So daily prayer prompts, small group discussion questions, anything like that it can do. How many of you stream your worship services to YouTube, specifically? Okay. One of the things that YouTube is doing, a couple hours, it's usually a few hours after your stream, if you go back, YouTube has created a written transcript of your sermon or of your whole worship service, but it has created that. You can, and it's actually really good. If your sound quality is good enough, like if you have good quality sound, its transcriptions are darn near spot on. What that means, if you're like me and you're not a manuscript preacher, a transcript exists. And so one of the things that we can do, and we have done, is I've gone back, copy and pasted the transcript out of YouTube, pasted it into my Gemini, and said, clean this up in a lightly formatted way. Please remove all the ums and the likes and the filler words, but give me back a slightly cleaned up version of this. And it does it, and it does a very good job. And now I do have a manuscript that didn't exist before, and it definitely wasn't worth time to have some stenographer back there, recording my words as I spoke them. But if YouTube is going to go through all the trouble of doing this for me, well, then I'm going to use it. And so now I have the sermon from last week in a written form, and I can say, great, write me 5 prayer prompts based on this. Write me small group discussion questions for my men's group, right? So the task is, I might give it the task, say, and this is who my men's group is. Based on the sermon, give me 10 discussion questions for my men's group, of which I will choose the best 5, right? These kind of efficiencies exist in a way that we just did not have before. So that's another piece to think about. How do you use this both on the front end preparatory sort of way, but then once the content, whatever it is that you are doing with it exists, how do you then develop the follow-up content pieces that go along with it? Because this is basically this is what it was built to do, right? And so those use cases are pretty well established in like the business world, right? Like give me a summary of this, whatever. It is very, very applicable in ours as well. All right. Pause for questions. We got like 8 more minutes together. Yeah. I don't know that I have a question per se, but I have an interesting story. Okay. I was using ChatGPT to do some research on Wesley. Mm-hmm. I had taken classes on Wesley, and I know everything there is about Wesley, but I thought, well, just for the kick of it, I'll just ask for it to give me a biography of John Wesley, minister over this time period. So Chat fed me back this wonderful story about Wesley, which was about 90% correct, but then it went off on a tangent about him going to jail for tax evasion. Oh, I missed that part of my church history class. So what it did was it somehow combined Wesley Snipes with John Wesley. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Well, again, that's the check the facts, and you do need to do that. And the nice piece is, for a lot of the stuff that I use it for, like if I want facts, I'm going to go check Wikipedia. I'm going to go do that. Thanks. I mean, I tend to do that, and then I can feed it into it. I'm like, based on this information, do this. The nice thing for what we do is, the call to worship either sounds good or it doesn't. Right? The prayer prompt either sounds good or it doesn't, right? So much of what we do is not a matter of fact anyway, that there's a lot of really good use cases for it. And so the thing that the thing that the handout kind of ends with is, nobody is saying, and least of all me, that we shouldn't put the time and energy and effort to craft the things that are important to us in the ways that we like doing, right? There is a role for that, and there is a place for that, and we absolutely should. There's also times and places where we need help because it's either something we don't feel particularly strongly about, we don't feel particularly called to, it's not within our skill set, right? Or, I am not a very good, liturgy writer, right? It's just whatever part of the brain that allows you to do things in those ways. I value it, and I love it when somebody does a good job. It's not a tool I have in my toolbox that I have developed all that well. So I'm so grateful to now have a tool to rely on where I can say, help me write an adapted Great Thanksgiving for this particular thing that's happening right now. And then the nice thing is I can look at it and go, I like it or I don't, go back and try again. This is good, but this isn't, refine it and make it better. So there's still some me in there, right? But that is not, that allows me to have that work done in a way that, feels much less burdensome. Now, some people, if you love writing liturgy and you want to write it out longhand on a piece of paper, surrounded by flowers or whatever it is you do that, great. Please do that, right? But find ways, it does let you do things, in a more efficient way that you would otherwise maybe wouldn't actually do. So let me see if there was one other thing, right? Oh, no, okay. You're welcome. So, yeah. So once you start playing with it, you can start seeing some, usually you can find some, additional use cases and different places to do it. What I would suggest is think about the places right now in your life and in your ministry, either you don't feel you have time for that you would like to do, and is there a way to let it help you do that? Or things that you regularly have to do that you don't enjoy, and is there a way to make that more efficient? Yeah, so that's what I wanted to talk about at the end there. It does. It is a remarkably good translator. So it can translate for you between languages really well, again, because it's read everything. It's a fairly basic task for it. It's one of those things that it's just going to replace all the existing solutions. So yes, you can say, hey, because not only can it translate, which is something that computers have been able to do for a while, it can do it in a much more discerning way. So you could not only say, hey, translate this document from English into, Portuguese or whatever you might want to translate it into. I just think about that because I did some work in Angola, and there was always that language barrier. But you can say that. But you can also say, translate this document into Portuguese. The recipient of it is of a high status. Because I actually ran into this when I was sending emails to the Bishop of the East Angola Conference 15 years ago, right before we visited, and I was using an automated tool to translate it from English into Portuguese, which was fine, except the automated tool was using the much more familiar version of the addressing language and not the more formal version that ought to have been used for somebody of his status. He commented on it when I was there, and it was a little embarrassing. So now you can not only say, translate this, but you can say, you can give it those sorts of details so that when the software has to make a choice, do I use the less formal or the more formal, it knows to use the more formal. So it does really good at that. The other thing that it can do, and I did a training on this, and somebody was from Utah, and one of the things that they came back and said, one of the use cases they came for it is when they are putting out communication with things for people in their community, they work with a lot of people in the life of their community who are former Mormons. That's a lot of their church is former Mormons, which is fine. But if you don't know intimately well, like Mormon culture, there are some landmines out there that you might not even know exist. And so she had made it a habit of saying, after she was done writing her sermons, is there anything in here that might be triggering or bring up something for former Mormons, because the way that they approach some of the scriptures is different than how we do it. I'm not picking on Mormons. Or former Catholics, or Baptists, or whatever. That's one of the things that it can do for you. You can say, well, actually, yes, because you've got this thing over here and this thing's over there, right? You can ask it, and it will do its darndest, to check for things like, is there any, is there any obvious bias in this thing that I am putting out? Is there a obvious political leaning in this thing that I'm putting out? Which is fine if you mean there to be, but if you don't mean there to be, as far as having those safety checks, right, you can do that. You can ask it to analyze your sermons, your transcripts, your email communication, or whatever. Even along the generations, right? Is there, I have done this where I've crafted like a stewardship letter, and then I've gone through and asked it to give me 2 different versions of it. Give me basically the 50 and above version of it and the 50 and below version of it, right? Give me a version of this that speaks to people who are currently in their working years. Give me a version of this that speaks to people who are in their retirement years, right? It has always been good practice to find ways, to communicate with people where they are. Now we have the tools that makes it much more efficient and much more practical to actually do it. Because I'm lucky to get 1 stewardship letter done, let alone 2 or 3 for the various constituencies in my church, even though my constituencies deserve to be spoken to and communicated with in the way that they can hear best. Now I can write kind of one general one, and I can say, and how I tend to break this down is, my working age families and my retirees, right? They have a different set of needs, they have a different perspective, and they have a different set of challenges. So I can ask it to subtly tweak, give me a version for this, give me a version for that, right? And again, that's a 5-minute extra step, not a 5-hour extra step. So different things like that, not only translating languages, but translating between culture, translating between perspective and things like that. So that's another thing too, you can ask it, how might a younger person, because I have to confront the fact that I'm not young anymore. Even the church says I'm middle-aged, and they took a while to determine that. I might want to say, how is this, give me an example that might connect better with a younger audience, or an example that might connect better with an older one. It's remarkably good at that. And then the last thing I want to say too, I recognize we're kind of over time, but we started late, is these tools are only getting better. The AI that you're working with today is the worst version of AI you will ever work with, right? They're only getting better as they only learn more, which is both really exciting and maybe like 10% scary. But I don't think they're coming. I don't think my former profession as a software engineer is being hard hit by these tools. Because the other thing it's really good at is writing code. I didn't realize when I stepped out of that world into this one, I was entering a more secure profession, but apparently I am. I think the most important thing for us as we use these things is to make sure that our humanity is still in it. I would never send anything out that I didn't read, right? And make sure that still feels like me and still feels like us, right? I think what people want to see is our humanity. They want to connect with us. They want the personal story. They want the handshake. I think that is what's going to keep us, our profession, somewhat safe from the, crazy changes that are coming because of these tools. And I think this can actually help us continue to do the work that we are called to do in a more efficient ways. In a time when most of our congregations are dealing with declining resources, it's not very often that we get handed a new tool that can be as helpful and save us as much time and energy and effort as this one does. So I think it bears looking into your own kind of workflows where you might want to use it. So my website is on there. You can download, like I said, the digital version of this as well. And there's some other resources on there. And then you can contact, if you got any questions or anything, you can kind of contact me through that. So any other closing thoughts, questions? Ooh. You guys have been great. All right. Thank you.